Tor roet eentje nog aan. Geweel vierne Chanter zonder viep voor aan een Alpen. Als je een kervline dierk, mijn naam zijn, een koikevline dierk. Ach, vierne Chanter is zo'n sjorse die viep, roon movement, ochgevlien aan een Alpen. Ach, bjarn moor. Het raam zijn, agus een naam aan ure, hanik fianisch, en maar fianisch schrijftje, kun ro piep, je sjorse, agus gaan je kindje, je sjorse piep avaan. Ach, sjorse die piep, li rivitjen, agus malen, aan een Alpen, van, maar een kervline dierk.
Up of this reed. This is a piece of elder with a tongue cut in it. And beautiful. And it sounds like this. Just by itself. So it's just a stick with holes in it without the reed. And this is elder, which has a soft central pith, which you poke out with a stick or a rod. And then of course you have two horns. One for the resonator, which concentrates the sound energy, and then one for the wind cap, so your mouth does not touch the reed, similar to chrome horns and Roush fifes in medieval music.
Pan ges I afel yn y pibgod am y tro cyntaf, nath rhywbeth fy nharo I. Tybed oedd yn bosibl chwarae'r offeryn yma trwy wneud anadlu cilchol, a fe nes I weithio ar y dechneg yna nes mod i'n cael y beth yn gywir. Mae'n ymwneud â natur o'r offeryn. Yn gyntaf, chi ddim yn gorfod cyffodd ar gorsen gyda'ch gwefusau. Os dim ombwysio, dych chi I gadw. Ac ar ben hynny, beth ydy'r pibgon, wrth gwrs, ydy sachbib heb y sach. Beth ych chi'n neud felly yw defnyddio'ch bochau fel y sach. Mae'n swnio'n fwy anodd nag yw e. Wrth esbonio'r peth, mae rhywun yn gofod dweud, wel, chi'n anadlu mewn trwch trwyn tra bod chi'n dal awyr yn eich bochau. A tra bod chi'n anadlu mewn, chi'n gwthio'r awyr mas gan ddefnyddio'ch bochau. Da yw swllt oedd hwnna, a ges I hwnna oddi wrth Hugh Roberts. Mae'n gan o Sir Fôn, mae yna fachan sy'n mynd mas a chan o sadwrn I wario I arian yn y dafarn. Mae gyda fe swllt I ddechrau, mae'n gwario ceiniog a cheiniog arall, ac wrth gwrs yn y pen draw, stefedd ddim byd ar ôl.
And the bag starts to appear and people stop using the circular breathing. Presumably the bag makes life a bit easier. does mean you can keep going for longer, and possibly it means that the intonation of the instrument can last longer. It also means you can play a bit louder.
Sure die skillen sauriche ik na die vertjellichen maar kleine krimmen agus kleine karster aan het sanilen skianach agus kleine kraing sanilen woele agus de die vertjellichen in chierwoord maar kleine krieger agus na kommenich aan een France&Spain agus wij de fas skildal agus maar has je niet zo van de lurichen bigente sé seo de eachtré sauriche erfíp agus na téalachen sin ach nam verkse war kengal uawasoch látir éter na téalachen agus an uair hiike giat amach ag an táiseach an san coicah nó siamh nó seach go blina díag gan ó kenglich an látir étara agus na bart agus sculption bartoch a bha bíchanta éter Alpe agus éden tro na míanation. Bhí ag beláris an go ró na differ téalachen dul chimichal agus ha mi kretchen gon ró clanna crimmen dul go el an ile agus go san tír mór agus mar a siimplad a dul go dúich cé an an tua na Halapin. Mar sin ha bicken tointje seach an stú a ha sin léag als na leorichen kommente an landú.
Channeal na fíbe bhain fo hús agus drech na pípe gendú. Codir se bhana seán anstra an colach.
Charóiad cholátir le fuaim as na rivichin mar haiad agin an dú agus rúdsáirite a hanig an an Alpe govéil trí dosan, trí dúis a fíb agus ha seo dé tóas no balance an éte fuaim nan dosan agus fuaim an jitan agus mar a bha fuaim an jitan a fás na sláidere bha féimeáil som doséile so ha an triúr júchan drásta. So ha fuaim na píp a fás na sláidere agus ha ide a dul na sáirte cúteoch.
Whether it came to Scotland first, whether it came to England or Ireland first, we'll never know, and I think everyone in all those different countries will all claim their right to that heritage. The thing about it for me is wherever it came first, Scotland adopted it as their national instrument, and on the moment you lift a set of bagpipes, Great Highland bagpipes as they're known, the moment you lift a set of them, people immediately think Scotland. It's a brand now, and the bagpipe is the brand of Scotland. So to me it will never probably matter now where it originated, nor probably will we ever know, but certainly on the southern part of Ireland and down around Cork and places like that, 300-400 years ago there were pipes there at that time.
Well, it has become symbolic of Scotland as a result of its use in the Highland regiments from the 18th century through the Victorian era and through the Great War, perhaps in particular, to the extent that now everywhere in the world the word bagpipe is immediately associated with Scotland, even if in fact it belongs to a much wider area.
Zegt mór an fústan na dwe misisiach nach ceol ac yn gaif i ddysgu ar y manuscript dan. Ach can hitig Hyd fer y ninja nys nils agus gaag an has vín sa gachlwch mar agos yn cagael sy'n mar efa chawnd ag sŵlam gael lit nech grwyddi sé bhost a vacans fi gatulus dwys agus sy'n ydym a yedig as y fel ac at wydyn rach ag asachat sy'n ag aas gan ys hyl ag aonia ga ywyd jas ahania fi gatul onia sy'n fi mahas dyn yn y fen Lowland Pipes so a gynnydd jas ahania agus hyl ag Williams fi gael tîs yn mynd i'r post ac yn ein i dat agus siwm y post y yw'n sy'n agus feril y hyl hw mi le cawndarach gyd ffat y post yn nyer i rwynia John MacDonald's Welcome to South Youth sé dal van í le dalaprekar in je borst sin agus sé hen i yw'n sy'n gans y borst a hen smehad i ddys vi bwla chara Hanil sem rot ag seil vehu sin a rot ag nach a cynum chamagad an i gat gacha agus rot an 4 yw'r hyn agus Þeim ag gainach ag an hra borst ac am sgrís je rút nach rá agus humid i húfed i vengi støy agus yw'n sy'n borst le chainj Brum baharachan ta dri hiri hiri ahodro raharo hiri brum baharachan ta dri hiri hiri o hiri haracham paracham drum sin hiet heruye agus ha kynum kujikin vi gachlicht gan hos an lewis agus trauma di hulitin to ma hos agus som kra Hanil bíjak sin agat kerstidis. Jimmer avis agat skal bíjak sin kærak ma hun skal referi røyna jun sig gans akapolet.
People knew how to read music as an academic guide, but that's all it was. The book was just a guide, you know, to learn notes, and we had to learn the notes and the ornamentations as they were written, but the way we learned the real feeling and the real expression of piping and the style of piping was in Chanterach, and that's the way I learned. And also, of course, with the Chanterach, you're maintaining the oral tradition in it. You're maintaining the feeling that's been passed down. I think that's interesting too. That's like, you can't really like read about that and try and invent it or reinvent it by your playing. You have to have somebody singing to you and passing you that feeling or that rhythm, and that's it's like that's the way we do it. So you know you can pass it on that way.
Am ismunjin on a large gynne kanchadach da je shar is on inzach kelmoor go you dashach ma hawar son inzach te gunje mar ha kodike ne mar hansa se viol and lights and shades subtleties agus knois motion se forste how chekesk hanil she kanchadach shar
Ma chainte sin arás go na leimskrivian agus go na Chanterach gag an Caimbalach an nar a gael as na feikin go daif an itter an áran agus galmór va fata na baske na ha a djú agus chomisje ram de go arás go níide sin agus na cealdachin sit de caleichen i dúne agus gebig buaig an dáis a heisina a clúich ceall mór a djú. Agus ha fata nas ceallmhare aniche dú fáin a vinet, cúteach ha fata nas sasa ceall mór íonslachuig, agus nuair a heisina cíneach gur an trá violaris, trá chlúis a bheith dúine giúsach ar a feicinn sé an scríte. Tuke sin an oorsin, gur sit an nás a bhain agus go le hat an as tachtiniche.
We had a guy at the piping centre from Serbia doing a talk on Serbian piping, and he was saying they don't even get to touch the pipes until they can sing all the tunes. And you know, it's quite a nice thought, and they don't call it playing the pipes, they call it singing the pipes, because they learn it all in their head first and they can vocalise it first.
Fach van de jail noren. Bi clownerie shiner a fiep. Is je hainjnig gewil geil was an alpe agus kutjach held an in jeding, boertje wie kra shine piepe en maatje wie kra klichne piepe.
Well, nu had de tien a dashach Amerikaanse gewilde goede tunje is Tsjechisch een een goede draaf. Agus maar ik heb een kerry en hakken ze GDE ze nu nou ze houden goede tunje krijgen. Wanneer ik hier laat de tasje. Ach, maar hij is inderdaad ze hier gewoon een nog kiet ficht. Ik dan nog als een schernig. Hier kunnen we een keer in zo'n naast cultuurmateriaaltje. Haar standaard moet je dan, haar steegje. Agus nimmer hij had een zintje niet. Hij had een hij kon terecht hele in de geld. Agus hier troet dan met je en hij kan dorsten zich hele maar gebeuren. Hij niet lekker studio zich hier dan weg. Had geen oorzaak terug, wat je maar gebeuren laten tassen als goed.
Wat juffer George piepen kan gloeien vuch naar ranjorbe, agus kan tjekkev vuch vrechting. Stoch gere fiep voorak in heen, agus fiep uling a ering in jorin is anichtje. Ach had doorloges ne piepen kutjoch aan een jerhua hassing aan een Northumbria. Piep weg wien a haar gloei le schonog njo balak sheji, gaan aan ietsje le gedar.
Everybody's aware of the Scottish bagpipes, and a lot of people have river dance in Ireland and know the Irish pipes and so on. But really, it was seen as a novelty rather than part of our culture in many quarters. The Northumbrian small pipes that most people will know of now are the closed chanter pipes. They have a parallel chanter where you play the tune and the end is stopped up. This happened somewhere in the last 3 centuries that the end was stopped up in order to mean that when you play the pipes, if you cover all the finger holes, there's no sound comes out unless you open a hole, so you can play very short notes. Highland pipes always have a note sounding because there's always a hole open at the end of the chanter. And they've got the bellows, which of course is the main difference between our bagpipes and many of the other pipes that are played across the world. But that's not to say there aren't bellows elsewhere, such as in France and the Czech Republic and so on. Jamie Allen, who was our first famous piper, and he was a great rogue, he was said to have played 5 different sets of pipes, Irish pipes and the Scottish small pipes and Highland pipes, as well as the 2 Northumbrian pipes. So there are all sorts of them. People just, they tend automatically to think of you know, the Highland pipes that have been taken right across the world by the British Army in the pipe bands there, but there's lots and lots of different instruments.
Ballamorpeth an the Mian Northumberland, agus samaun a hat taski a hat taspinnig echtri na piepe fuggen heul, agus ge harach echtri piepe na duche.
I think a lot of visitors to the museum scratch their heads a bit and think, what's a bagpipe museum doing in Morpeth? But they then find out that bagpipes are not specifically a Scottish phenomenon, and in fact that Northumberland is the last place in England which has its own bagpipes. I think a lot of people come here with thinking they know what bagpipes sound like, and they go away with a different view because they can hear the sound of the Northumbrian pipes, but also sometimes the Irish pipes as well. And we've had concerts with people here from all over Europe. If you go back to the early part of the 20th century, there might have only been a handful of players left playing. But sometime in the 70s with the general folk revival, there's a couple of people like David Burley and Colin Ross started making reliable sets of pipes. They were all in tune with each other, so people could play in duets with each other. And there was somewhere people could go and buy a set of pipes.
The 2 types of music we have really are the
the old core repertoire of the peacock things with the keyless tunes and the variations. And then I suppose that's slightly separate from the more modern tunes that use the keys, the hornpipes, jigs and reels and things that perhaps came into the repertoire a bit later. If you go to a normal session, then you may play at Lads of Anak, which is one of the old tunes, but and then mix that in with some of the more modern ones as well. Obviously, I suppose as musicians moved around, then the tunes moved around with them, and still today that continues. I mean, there's been a big Irish contingent on Tyneside at one point, so we also have some Irish tunes as well, but I suppose more from the Scottish side.
There's a common repertoire. The earliest manuscript that we have, which is of a border pipes repertoire, William Dixon of Stamfordham, his early 18th century manuscript, which was found in Perth Library, incidentally, and it was thought to be fiddle tunes, but it was obvious when they were examined in more detail that they were the pipes repertoire. That was the sort of basis of many of the tunes that are now played on the small pipes. So there's a common currency, but there are divergences as well.
An y doi chanila na ynnych cryniach William Dixon, cryniach a ha chwtramach an dwlchas na Peep yn Northumberland, y lorach an y Lorlan yn y Pierst. Ha Peepern agus Pwst agus bechgan doi yn clich y fi glwys at yr asht yr ryrst, eitr sgiren agus eitr dwchen yn ffwhws. Fa tachrsteg yn namsyn sa tachrst yn jw. Ach le doi yn siw le jw agus na miangen, is doch y cyfil na Kenligen sin na slóie agus is stocha na sláitide.
Bwch yn gyrryd fa ganiad hyn ygyn i ianach fíben agus mar horig erin sin na'n píben hen na yrys fi fôr an Northumberland.
We're quite lucky these days because it's much easier to get a set of pipes than it used to be. In the past there were very few sets around, very few pipe makers as well. But I suppose since the 70s the number of professional pipe makers has increased. One pipe maker has produced over 2,000 sets, and there are a lot of, I suppose, full-time pipe makers. So it's actually been able to get the set. All the pipe makers have waiting lists, and I think there are more people wanting to play than there are pipes, which is a good way to be, I suppose.
Suarach na fawn de fíben an Northumberland ans na trifichiten, a cha písach fôr et chin yn hyochog von Warsen.
The traditional pitch of the Northumbrian pipes is round about, I suppose, between F and F sharp, but we also have G chanters now, which allow us to play a lot easier with other types of pipes. I play with the pipes of, I suppose, from 4 different countries as the 4 pipers, with Mick O'Brien playing Lowland Pipes and Barnaby Brown playing Scottish small pipes and Francois Lazarevich playing French musette. And for that I use a G chanter, and all the pipes work very well together. I suppose they're all of a similar volume, those pipes, whereas obviously if you have a Highland pipe, then the Northumbrian pipes wouldn't really stand a chance, but with other bellows blown pipes, then the volume and the style it has a nice contrast, but they do blend well together as well.
There has to be an awareness that there are still people out there that are the carriers of the tradition, because people that can learn from relative newcomers and not quite have the feel for it. You've got to steep yourself in it all.
I think it's important to keep it going because it's always been a living tradition, the Northumbrian piping tradition. It's really kept going through some low points, but it's probably at one of its high points at the minute. But I think it's important to to keep touch with the past as well.
a háisich mi clúchin hoiseach, sé fíb fór a bha mi séin, ach na a chhuala mi cúchicin a clúch na pípe bigge, an a gléis a bha ferris de clechge cúchiri instrumentin eile, húch mi an a gul lé. Ha drech na pípe bigge alapanich aharachach tron a líntjen, go bhí mar a haindiú.
Leis a fíbveic ha vigiad ga séiteg leis an anel, ach vaiad a clachgag balach héiti cúteoch, agus vaiad na siar le balach séiti, mar a vig an sénatar a pípere a gléag na rivicin tiram, agus vigiad curamach faun na siar mar a vigiad tiram. So, mar sin, han a píper in de clúich an ún cheall píp vic agus píp fór. Ach ha diffa traditionen an eter éirin agus sasin agus alapa mar a siimple. So mar a vigiad de clúich ceall a sasin vigiad de clúich an een steiléter jaalichtje agus charro iad cho jail son a vi clachgag grace noting mar ha na grace noting agin an landú. Agus an éirin ha de clachgag steilich in eile mar krachaning, krachag, shakes, agus so ha steilich in eterialigtje get a ha de clachgag agus a séin an oenforst mar a simpler ha ceall a dol haul sruna meile fat na hunje agus ha gach dúich a gra gevéil an ceall sin achgesen.
We'd all heard the great Lowland Pipers, Paddy Keenan and Ronan Brown and people like that had been playing, and we'd heard the Northumbrian Pipers, but the familiarity with if you like, an indigenous Scottish bellows piping tradition, that had been lost. And in the early 80s, a revived bellows piping movement took off, fueled in part by the Northumbrian pipe makers. They contributed a lot, the sort of technology, the reeds, the style of making the instruments, but also by enthusiasts like Hamish Moore in particular. Once people started looking for these instruments, of course they discovered there were many of them in the old museums, and that was a kind of catalyst to a new age of bellows piping starting here in Scotland. I was playing Highland pipes at the time, but I was interested in the broader sort of sphere of folk music. What could you do with bagpipes and other instruments playing together? But there were difficulties integrating Highland pipes into standard folk groups. So when small pipes came along playing in user-friendly keys, in more accessible keys like A and D, that was an interesting route, and that was what kind of drove me in that direction personally. It's taken off in a big way. There's been one thing that did happen in the very early 80s, in 1981, a society to promote bellows pipes in Scotland was started. That's called the Lowland Border Piper Society. That's an interesting body of, some fairly eccentric and interesting people there, but with one aim in mind, which is simply to promote bellows bagpipes, and particularly in their case to promote the repertoire of the borders, both sides of the border, Northumberland and Scotland. There was a shared musical tradition which is quite distinct in many ways from the Highland bagpipe music tradition in terms of repertoire. So they've been going, there've been loads of pipe makers have appeared on the scene. They're making very good instruments indeed nowadays, both small pipes, which are the little instruments that sound quite like Northumbrian pipes. There's a common ancestry there. But also what you might call lowland pipes, They're also sometimes called border pipes or reel pipes. And these are instruments that sound very like Highland bagpipes. They have a similar style of design. The chanter in particular is a conical bore, and it means it sounds an octave higher than the small pipes. So it would sound like a scaled down Highland bagpipe. And that instrument too has taken off in a big way. In many ways, indeed, that's the instrument of choice in the last 10 years. And you see a lot of these very attractive but fairly robust sounding instruments being played in modern folk groups like Dive, for instance, with Angus Mackenzie playing.
Hun mi fi big gutting see she is, they feel that gutting see she is like cutting another guitar, gutting a see she is. I just like Porsche. I need to like people that van hem ach she nog cule van hem. As a she shin shin a fossil soul. Gemaan more is farsing. En wegse.
Bhuaich Rob Wallace ceannart coiste na píbadach go mbeidh a fíbheh ag léas ar a fochail mar austramatch an Lowland ciúil.
Did a bit of research and got a hold of Francis Collinson's book, The Traditional and National Music of Scotland, and in it had these descriptions of Lowland pipes and Lowland small pipes. And of course nobody had any of these things. I'd never heard them, but didn't know anything about it. And they sort of fancied the idea of the Lowland pipes with the bellows. And I thought that maybe we could get a set going and that would work in the group. And so it proved. At that time there was nobody else that I remember, you know, doing it, and it just seemed to work, you know. It was a reasonable acoustic balance with the fiddles. Other bands had played pipes in the group, you know, but they'd amplified up the fiddles and the guitars and stuff with the Highland pipes, and that worked as well in a bigger, but we always wanted to be acoustic if we could possibly be, so we went down the road of the border pipes, and that seemed to work all right. At that time there were really very, very few pipers in folk bands. Now you can hardly find a Scottish folk band without a piper.
Fuch yn deich plan o fichyd chafod gyro fibvig a clwch idir, inis ha gnoichen eth chinadard gymor.
It really takes us back to the late 1600s, 1700s, where there was a tradition of playing very small instruments, chanters about that length, finger spacing, very tight, often mouth blown, sometimes bellows blown. They were very sweet little instruments. There's a famous set associated with Montgomery's Highlanders, which was a regiment that was formed to fight in the 7 Years' War in North America, the late 1750s. And that was a regiment that interestingly had a lot of pipers in it from the Isle of Skye. That lovely old instrument still exists. They were good, I think, for playing and singing perhaps together. Slightly different fingering technique from modern instruments. So when modern instruments took off in Scotland in the early 80s, there was people thought about what would attract players into it, and one thing was to design a fingering system, a scale that would allow Highland pipers to transfer very easily from the Highland bagpipe to the Scottish small pipe. The older style of playing would have been much more similar to a Northumbrian piping technique where one finger at a time is playing the particular note you're trying to form.
Rin viskar och kart, akamors. Hej och vicka begrej. Du maget is mug is molk. Hej, heil van hoors. Grapio dikke fåk en blad. Maar je kon me oor door vlaggen een kokerij. Van big thuis en toon en mijn magesken groesken gaal. Oh, ga wat je nooit aan het tijden gevoerd.
We've moved from the situation where in the early 1980s bellows-blown bagpipes were very rare in Scotland, almost unheard of, to the point where they're just part of the tradition. We can't really call it a revival anymore because they have been revived. Bellows bagpipes are part of the Scottish traditional music scene now.
Na gaan de fiepwit gaan ik een dava. Hapurin gaan de lessen geshow viaun, a synisch luch cute, lehich hemisch agus fun muur, I janig na piepen.
My dad was over in Ireland actually, and he first heard Lowland Pipes, and he saw them getting played in the pub, and was wondering if there was a Scottish equivalent, and thinking there must be. And at the time we were living in Canusie, and he came home and told his neighbour all about these pipes that you could play with other instruments and how fantastic it was. And the neighbour didn't say anything at all, but the next day there was a pipe case on the table, and it was a set of Scottish small pipes. So Dad went down to a well-known Northumbrian maker, Colin Ross, and got them checked over and got some reeds for them and got them going, and that was his kind of first foray into the world of Scottish small pipes. And he kind of worked out it was great getting to play with other instruments and fiddles and guitars and the right key and the right volume, and from then he just decided that he would want to make them as well. So since then it's kind of grown, and I joined the business about 98, just finishing off from school, and came in and started working with Dad, and we've got 2 or 3 other people who make parts of the pipes for us, and they come here to the workshop and we do a lot of the reed making and chanters and things like that. The main ones we make would probably be Scottish small pipes, and then we also make a lot of border pipes and reel pipes, which they're all bellows blown, so there's no moisture going into the pipes, so you can use cane reeds with no problems, and they stay very settled compared to the Highland pipes. We've gone down the route of making everything by hand, so the bags are hand stitched and the bellows are all handmade, and we make the reeds all individually, and also the pipes, they're all hand turned, so it's someone standing at a lathe taking the square bit of wood and making it round and shaping it and putting all the holes in, so everything has a bit of somebody going into it, and when the pipes come together here in the workshop with all the different craftsmen who've put part of them themselves into it. I'm going to make a cane drone reed here, and we just start with a bit of bamboo or cane that we got from the south of France, and we're just basically putting our tongue in it. So just cut down here, get rid of all these slivers of cane here. So myself and Dad go down to the south of France quite often, which is a nice trip, and there's a company down there called Rigotti who we get to go and hand pick our drone cane from, and also our chanter cane.
Ach, cóin jagin is dúaltich the feedback a hogal.
I would say the majority of folk have dabbled in Highland pipes at some point. Some are, you know, professional Highland pipers and are looking to add small pipes and border pipes to a band, or but then we do sometimes get folk who have never played before, and actually small pipes are very accommodating in terms of fingering. You can get away with a lot more, and because there's less maintenance involved, and obviously you don't need to blow, that you can kind of get on quite quickly with them, and certainly make a noise quite quickly. So yeah, it's a big mixture really. I think it's lovely hearing other people playing the pipes, and especially when they're singing, and maybe on recordings or things like that. Other professional musicians have recorded with our pipes, and you hear them, and it's just fantastic. And actually sometimes on the radio you can hear a set and you know that it's one of our sets of pipes, which is also great without even looking at them. You can just tell by the noise they're making, and I think that's a lovely feeling. I'm fairly sure that the small pipes and the border pipes came you know, to Scotland at the same time and developed around, you know, at the same time as the Highland pipes, and I'm sure, as is the same today, that back then Highland pipers would have had small pipes or border pipes as well, and you know, played them equally. There's a great quote from an old piper who used to say he loved playing his border pipes. Well, it was actually real pipes. He loved playing his real pipes because he could play them all night and they wouldn't go out of tune, and he could also smoke his pipe at the same time.
The Lowland Pipes are a woodwind reed instrument that were developed in around the 1700s. They were called Irish pipes or Union pipes, but now today they're more commonly called Lowland pipes because you use your elbow to press the bellows, and the Irish word for elbow is Uilleann. They were developed from the pastoral pipes, which had a slightly longer chanter. Our chanter is a little bit shorter, which means that you can sit down and place the chanter on your knee on a leather pad. The leather pad seals the bottom of the chanter, which means that you can play the second octave by putting a little bit more pressure on the reed.
The Lowland pipes usually have 3 or more drones: the tenor drone, the baritone drone and the bass drone. And the main function of the drones is to provide a continuous background sound to the main melody line. Another important development in the history of the Lowland pipes were the addition of these long-stopped pipes with keys. These are called the regulators. And these first appeared around the mid-1700s, beginning with one individual regulator and gradually more being added.
I'm going to play a tune called Larry Grogan, which is today known as Coppers and Brass. It's from the 1700s, and I'm going to play it on this set of pipes, which was made by John Egan in around 1760. And I'd like to thank Sam Lawrence for giving me a loan of pipes and a chance to play them.
The regulator's main function is to provide harmonic accompaniment to the tune. The sets vary in size, length and also in bore dimension. There are generally 7 reeds in a full set of uilleann pipes, and these can be made from natural materials such as cane.
The music that we play is very, very varied. There are tens of thousands of different individual pieces. A great deal of it is dance music, including reels, jigs, hornpipes, set dances, polkas, but also purely instrumental music, and a huge number of song airs that would be the oldest stratum of the music. They go back in some cases to the 17th, 16th, possibly even the 15th century. Uilleann piping has been in decline at several stages during its history, in particular in the late 19th century after the famine and the ill effects of that event. In the very late 19th century, the Cork Pipers Club were the first to start a group to try and promote the instrument, and they were followed closely by pipers in Dublin. And the Dublin Pipers and the Cork Pipers took special care to involve tradition bearers to ensure the continuity of an unbroken tradition of uilleann piping. Also present at that celebrated Feshkiol convention in 1901 was the famous traveller piper John Cash. He was an ancestor of the Doran brothers, Felix and Johnny, who carried piping into several parts of Ireland, and they were quite important in bringing piping as travelling musicians to parts of Ireland where there might not have been a local piper or where the tradition was largely absent.
Transmission of uilleann piping is chiefly by oral tradition, where players learn by ear. They normally start on a practice set with just a bag, a bellows and a chanter, normally around 10 years of age, or when their fingers are long enough to span the chanter. Over the last number of years we've seen interest from people of all ages and abilities in learning to play the pipes and to get access to a practice set and to learn from an experienced player. Another very important element in the transmission of uilleann piping is through families, where it's passed from one generation to the next.
With the arrival of the 1960s, there was widespread concern about the future of the instrument, and several groups were set up to try and arrest its decline. The Armagh Pipers Club in 1966 and the Peabody Uilleann in 1968. In the 1970s, uilleann piping began to become an internationally known form of music, particularly through the wonderful music of players like Paddy Maloney, Liam O'Flynn, Paddy Keenan and Finbar Fury. They and the bands they played with brought the music on concert tours to every corner of the world.
And then I discovered traditional music, Irish traditional music. It started off with ballad groups like the Dubliners and Sweeney's Men, and then a band called Planksty. And they had uilleann pipes in the band, and I was fascinated with this sound, and I'd never heard uilleann pipes before. In fact, I didn't know there were any other sorts of pipes other than the pipes they have in Scotland and march about with. But in fact, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of different types of bagpipes throughout the world. And this particular bagpipe is quite sophisticated and is blown with bellows and has a 2-octave range. Uilleann pipes were developed probably in the 18th century from earlier types of pipes in Ireland, pastoral pipes, war pipes, etc. There's two different types of uilleann pipes. The early pipes had a narrow bore and had a very, very sweet sound, but they were quite quiet. You know, in a big crowd or a big room, you could hear them, the sound carried, but they were not loud. When a lot of Irish people emigrated to North America, Irish music was actually very popular there, and Irish musicians wanted to perform. So two guys from Drogheda emigrated to Philadelphia and developed what is known as concert pitch pipe with a wider bore to give it a much louder sound. That's what I'm making at the moment. I actually have a preference for the old style pipes, which isn't such a problem nowadays because we have amplification and you can use microphones and stuff like that. With this, I've actually arrived at certain very small innovations, such as having a slightly longer chimney, as you would say, which is from the inner bore to the outside. So the wall of the chanters I make is slightly heavier, slightly thicker than some pipes, and I find that that helps me to keep the tuning in D, and they have a nice sweet sound. The intention in the future is also to make the narrow bore pipes. A friend of mine, John Hughes, is making me some tools at the moment so I can make narrow bore pipes pitched in C and B.
There's no sign, at least from the vantage point where I'm looking at, of Irish music dying. It seems to be, if anything, gathering in strength. This is witnessed by the fact that a lot of the musicians and a lot of the very, very good musicians nowadays are youngsters. I know that I couldn't hold my own against some of the youngsters playing pipes, and that's a great thing to see.
Leatherwork was the first skill that Eugene taught me. The bags and the bellows have to be airtight, and that's the hard part. The timber we use for the bellows boards is elm. It's a lovely timber, and it's native. And it takes nails beautifully, where teak or mahogany tend to split. The weaving I've been doing for the pipe bags is a warp face weave. In other words, the warp shows and the weft doesn't. It's a good weave for the pipe bags because it is strong, for one thing, and it's nice looking, it's decorative. But more importantly, it keeps the bag from slipping under the piper's arm. Green is more or less a traditional color for piper's bags, so I've incorporated that with some other colors that I thought blended well. There you go.
Lovely stuff.
How's that look to you?
That's mighty.
It's airtight, is it?
Perfect.
Had a bit of trouble with this. Is that too long?
Ah, no,
Will
that'd be
work
nice.
okay?
Cover that.
Yeah.
No, it covers anywhere then.
Great.
That in the pot.
Yeah, it'll be about 20 minutes.
Thanks.
The last key is fitted to the base regulator. Soon it will be time to bring all the component parts together. It takes Eugene and Jody a whole month to complete a full set of pipes. This brass tube will be firmly screwed to the side of the stock with a gasket in between. Regulators enable the piper to play chords, particularly important for the playing of slow airs. They have a double reed and a conical bore, just like the chanter.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice enough, yeah. Top there, you want to cut it a little more square across to get some...
Like history and folklore, music too was once passed down from generation to generation. Conscious of the serious rupturing of that tradition in this century, Eugene takes a particular pleasure in the interest of his son Ian.
What's that here when you're putting it?
It's a tenor regulator.
What's that one?
Baritone regulator. And then the awkward one is the bass. Getting that on and having it lined up properly on the stock. So eye it up and see if it's okay. They have to be right so your wrists hit with the keys nicely.
All level?
All level, yeah. And you can hit them with your hands to play chords.
How do you seal that from here, leaking out from there?
I have to put a leather gasket on the inside of it when I get it marked, and that's what I'm doing now.
Are they all different lengths, so they're all together like that so you can hit them?
That's right, yeah. They all have to line up under your wrist. The uilleann pipes are basically a parlour instrument. They were developed to be played indoors and are generally played in a sitting position, although in the past pipers have used a gadget called a piper's crutch so that they could play in the streets and collect money. From the middle 18th century to the present day, pipe makers have experimented with different bores and different hole sizes and different hole spacings in an attempt to change the tone colour and the music of the uilleann pipes.
This has resulted in a vast storehouse of information and experimentation, and the present-day pipe maker has a lot of material to draw on if he wants to experiment further. Music is, in my opinion, just one facet of human expression, but a very important one. Traditional music in particular, I believe to be a precious heritage akin to our language. Even more important, it transcends the political and religious divide at home here in Ireland.
Ha daifed yn y dwch yn ceiltioch coiw, a chan daifed yr alabe agus y fretyn fec caran anasoch, o'r hadydd instrument nasiant yn y halabe edrych hort hwge heen. Y cwr steile edrych ialwtje yn doi clwche. Ha berwyd ield gewaun pie beglointjen aan zijn vretting wik en de kloetje kutjerische wambaard, ach ik unnaam waar na anas klointjen fiep voor alapanach.
La proximité, les relations anciennes entre l'Écosse et la France, la vieille alliance, the old alliance, plein d'éléments qui fait que la cornemuse écossaise a toujours été dans l'imaginaire des Français et en particulier des Bretons. Pour les Bretons, les Écossais sont leurs frères, leurs cousins, quoi, beaucoup plus que d'autres régions, d'autres parties de la France, par exemple.
Sé bagad heddig a chrys gyda Lowland Pipes a hachar sa bhretin vich. Gan tseicah ha fíb fór aginnig a clúisian, ha agus drumichin agus a luad instrumentile, go sé charad a bhíniu agus bombard, instrumentin le fuaim art bín. Hanna bagadú dúaltach a bhí mór tacar in na cónlain aginne. Be fargus fór an as an bagadú ga camal gachjarach an an brest, balle fúst an in hanna njert na bretin bidje.
Traditionnellement, les Bretons ont toujours joué une forme de cornemuse. La cornemuse a été répandue un petit peu partout en Europe, mais en Bretagne, nous avons une cornemuse qui s'appelle le biniou. Qui est un instrument très particulier, unique en Europe, parce que c'est un instrument très aigu, le chanter est très petit et le son du biniou est très caractéristique. Et pendant tout le 19e siècle, jusqu'au début du 20e siècle, les Bretons jouaient cette cornemuse, mais après la Première Guerre mondiale, une bonne partie des musiciens ont été décimés par la guerre. Et après la Première Guerre mondiale, il restait très peu de joueurs de biniou bombarde. Et une poignée de jeunes Bretons ont eu l'idée d'introduire en Bretagne la grande cornemuse écossaise. Donc c'était après la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Et en 1946, on a créé le premier bagad, qui est donc comme un pipe band, mais avec des cornemuses, des bombardes et des tambours. Et les Bretons ont adopté la cornemuse écossaise et lui ont donné le nom de biniou braz.
La technique est sensiblement la même, l'instrument peut être le même. Par contre, la musique est complètement différente, les exigences ne sont pas les mêmes. Quand on pratique la musique écossaise, on va être beaucoup plus concentré sur les aspects de technique, de précision de jeu, de précision d'accords, de sonorité. Et c'est vraiment un exercice extrêmement précis et rigoureux. En bagad, on essaye de refaire la même chose, mais on sait que la musique, a priori, est souvent moins difficile techniquement. Par contre, on joue de la musique bretonne avec des accents et des nuances qui lui sont propres et qui ne sont pas celles de la musique écossaise.
Alors la principale différence entre un bagad et un pipe band, c'est la présence des bombardes. La bombarde, qu'est-ce que c'est que la bombarde? C'est un chanter qui est joué directement en pinçant l'anche du chanter avec les lèvres. En fait, c'est un instrument de la famille du hautbois. C'est un hautbois primitif, entre guillemets. Et il y avait des bombardes dans presque toute l'Europe autrefois. Encore maintenant, vous avez des bombardes en Algérie, ça s'appelle la raïta, en Turquie, ça s'appelle la zurna, en Inde, on s'appelle le chennai, en Italie, on s'appelle le pifero, et j'oublie certainement. Et la bombarde a disparu dans le reste de la France, mais est restée en Bretagne. Et le bagad est l'association de la bombarde avec the Great Highland Bagpipe. Et évidemment les percussions écossaises, les caisses claires écossaises. Mais le bagad moderne maintenant est devenu un véritable orchestre entre 50 et 60 musiciens avec un chef d'orchestre, avec des arrangements, des harmonies complexes et la présence d'autres instruments, des clarinettes, il peut y avoir un accordéon, il peut y avoir même des chanteurs, des percussions diverses. Et le bagad de 2011 n'a plus rien à voir avec le bagad de 1946 ou même 1970 ou 80. Il y a eu une évolution extraordinaire.
I've been going to Brittany for God knows how many years now, and what impressed me was that the Breton pipers were right in there when it came to pibroch. The understanding of the timing and the nuances of pibroch, it was like a duck to water. The marches, the traditional marches, they found extremely difficult to handle because it was just all a bit too rigid for them.
I first went to Brittany in 1983. And I was amazed at the way they played and their style of music. When I first heard it, was very bizarre to me. All these phrases that were repeated over and over and different kind of dance rhythms. You know, at that time, at my age, as a teenager, it was like heavy 2/4 marches and Kilmore that I was used to. So it was quite different. But what I did learn was the kind of the improvising thing that they had going, the freestyle of ornamentation. They weren't so, that's a doubling and that's the way it's in the book. And if you don't play it, you'll be taken straight to Merlini. You know, it wasn't like that. They were very kind of free with their ornamentation and you could pick and choose, and that was interesting.
Get the second oog cara nure hans na bagadu. San an sich het liedje niet te vlien, wat een kurer woon in hoschig. Ha meintje na bret in je bidje, vi kluchne njaustra mat een tuugesal akke, voor je immetag lien. Een moeier een tuur klanjer haast de vinu, agus a wambard gan schuin sin haun nos. Et telien jo fest nos, maar herat ruwe in shen, a konrach hoogjelgen over, bainchen, lachen sere, smashen avert.
Il n'y a pas d'équivalent à mon avis. Je pratique le kiolmor et je crois que le kiolmor est vraiment unique. Nous n'avons pas de musique classique de la cornemuse, puisque la cornemuse n'existait pas chez nous. Et le petit biniou était un instrument utilisé surtout pour la danse. C'est un instrument de danse. Autrefois, les gens n'allaient pas écouter les concerts de bar, les binious. On n'était pas assis pour écouter. C'était toujours des instruments qui avaient une fonction dans la société traditionnelle, dans les champs, dans les travaux des champs. Après les travaux des champs, les gens se réunissaient dans les cours de ferme pour danser. Mais il n'y avait pas de concert.
Colchrische vretin vik agus alabe, ha dualagus lager, scheine piebe an canna nier huan Spain agus canna tua Portugal, goharach as na skiden, Asturias agus Galicia. Ha gné fieb ake gai pein dishin canner gaita agus steile cluche sonrich.
Bueno, a gaita galega para min é todo neste momento. A parte da gaita galega no noso país, penso que igual que aquí en Escocia, pois é un símbolo dunha cultura e dunha identidade propia. Realmente a importancia pois colleuna xa en finais do século XIX, cando unha serie de intelectuais tomaron ese instrumento como bandeira dunha cultura, e ata hoxe en día, pois, cos seus máis e os seus menos, pois está hoxe en día en alza e cada día irá a máis. A base do meu repertorio é tradicional, pero tamén hoxe en día toco tamén temas de nova creación. Iso si, a miña tendencia sempre é a tocar temas que teñan un corte tradicional, que sexan realmente que a cadencia sexa realmente que me lembre a aquelas músicas que eu teño escoitado ao longo dos anos. A transmisión oral foi fundamental na nosa cultura para que chegara hoxe en día. A nosa música sempre se transmitiu, ata hoxe en día, se transmitiu oralmente, de oído. Hoxe empregamos tanto o oído como a escritura para poder expresar as diferentes melodías. Nos, a transmisión oral, chamámoslle aprender de oído. Tocar de oído, ou aprender de oído, que eso xa o facían gaiteiros vellos. Os gaiteiros os que eu empecei, os campaneiros de Vilagarcía, a eles mandábanlle partituras. E o que facían era ir xunto a un director dunha banda de música para que ellas cantara e el, coa gaita, pois as tocaba.
Could you sing me one?
Sí, puedes cantar una.